All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to episode 11 of the Sandbox.Space weekly podcast. I am your host, Chris, joined by Baby, who's taking a nap in my lap. Pumpkin's around, you'll probably see her. And I've got a special guest, as always, George Ziets. How are you doing today, George?
Hello, I am very good. Good to be with you.
So George is I'll say a longtime game developer, industry vet without aging us too bad. And you've predominantly worked on RPGs. That's sort of been your jam, sort of C RPGs, if that term even means anything anymore. But I don't know if you want to give a little just quick blurb about yourself for folks.
Sure. So I have been working in games since 2001. I actually started in MMOs, but then I moved to CRPGs, mostly working at Obsidian and InXile. I worked on games like Fallout New Vegas, Dungeon Siege 3, Pillars of Eternity. What else? I was sort of part of the Kickstarter boom that happened in 2011, 2012, 2013. Actually, I started Obsidian on Neverwinter Nights 2, did a whole bunch of stuff there. And then was part of Pillars of Eternity, Torment Tides of Numenera, Wasteland 3 at InXile, and more recently started a studio called Digimancy Entertainment, and have been doing that since late 2019, early 2020, and that has been a roller coaster.
Yeah, isn't it? The fun of entrepreneurism
Yes.
and doing your own business.
Yes, indeed.
Well, George, thanks for joining. We got a bunch to talk. Pumpkin. We got a bunch to talk about today. I think right off the bat, actually, you mentioned something interesting that I was having a conversation about with my students yesterday. And so you are working on your own company. Whenever you're doing your own company, whether, I mean, it's a small pumpkin, please, small, large, whatever, we're always looking for funding, right? So I've raised money before through investors. I've also done Kickstarters. But you mentioned that you were a part of the early Kickstarter phase. And this discussion came up in my class yesterday talking about, because we were talking about production and talking to publishers. And one of my students asked about, getting money and kickstarting. And as I unfortunately feel like I do quite a bit, it's always like I'm the bearer of bad news, where I feel like the crowdfunding world right now is just I think it's so difficult, and it's almost sort of like an anathema to what it was designed to be when it first started, where it was, you could go in and support small companies or people that had interesting ideas. Now it's almost like, and I'm curious your thoughts on it, it's almost like you got to be a full-fledged development studio to do a Kickstarter campaign now, and you've got to have like your nice looking trailer videos, sometimes demos. Like, long gone are the days of just having some like cool concepts and maybe some concept art in a campaign. So as somebody who's looking on fundraising and has also been, around for a while, I'd be curious just to start the conversation out with that.
Yes, absolutely. So in the very early days of Kickstarter, you could totally go in with some cool concept art, a cool idea. Of course, you had to have a video, and it helped to have some decent production values. So if you look back, it's probably still online at the old videos, the old Kickstarter videos for Pillars of Eternity. We really just had like a cool video, the names of some cool people who were going to be working on it, cool ideas, and some concept art that looked really nice. And we got like, I forget how many millions of dollars, which was way over what we were asking for. Basically, same thing with Torment Tides of Numenera. That world is long gone. Now, really, you need to have something that you can really show. So you need to have like a functional prototype that looks really good. I'm really not even that locked into that like world anymore of the crowdfunding stuff, because it just became probably around 2015, 2016, it became increasingly difficult to get attention. And it became the amount of work you have to do for the amount of money you can get, like you're not getting really millions of dollars anymore. You're getting like tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands if you have a big name and a really popular project. But it's just not really for the amount of money that games cost and the amount of money that goes into, or time really, that goes into creating a good campaign and the amount of money that Kickstarter takes, the cost benefit just kind of isn't there anymore. And so I don't even know if there are many games that are on Kickstarter really anymore. Maybe some indie projects are getting enough money that they need if they're relatively small projects, but it's not 2012, 2013 anymore, which is sad because it was a cool time. But, but that time is gone. And
Yeah.
now it's back to looking for money from investors and publishers and people who have deep pockets.
Yeah, yeah. So on that front, we've been going over the past few weeks about a variety of things. So one of the articles that's in this week's edition is Sony loses $10 billion in value on off of their there was a financial meeting that they had where they said that they're readjusting their sales numbers because they're not going to hit as many. Same with Nintendo. Nintendo shares fell 6% after reporting the Switch 2 is going to be delayed. This is coming off of months and months here of layoffs in the industry. It seems like it's a rough time for the games industry all around. 2023 has largely been regarded as the worst year for investment in the past 20 years. So it's a tough time, and a lot of our audience, a lot of our people are, particularly with the layoffs, are looking into maybe starting their own business, going into the entrepreneur world, like you and I have done. I'm kind of curious your thoughts on these layoffs. Before we started, you mentioned you had some thoughts on the games layoffs, but also just on the state sort of the industry in general. Are we going through a recalibration? Is it going to, how long do you think it's going to take us? I believe there's better days on the horizon for sure, but I'd be curious your thoughts on some of this.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot here. So I've been trying to run a company for almost 4 years now, or maybe it has been over 4 years. Um, Funding has always been a challenge, but it has gotten increasingly challenging over that time. Um, in the earlier days, especially during COVID, there was a lot of money. There's the cat again.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of money floating around and flowing, and it sort of, I think it gave us a warped perception of how easy it is to get money in the industry. Um, Now a lot of money went out, a lot of overspending happened. A lot of companies that had a ton of money coming in launched a whole bunch of different projects, got a whole bunch of, or brought in lots and lots of people, made bigger teams, and now all of a sudden the capital is drying up. You're seeing, actually, there was. Are you familiar with Build a Rocket Boy? That whole thing
No.
that got so Build a Rocket Boy. They're trying to make. I'm forgetting the name of their game, but they're trying to make an investor funded. It's almost like a giant virtual reality kind of a. Oh God, what's the name of that? What's the name of that movie slash book? Oh, Ready Player
Ready
One.
Player
I
One.
have it on the shelf over there. It sort of felt like that to me. Like they're sort of trying to do that. Like, it's a giant world where you can do anything and players can create stuff, and it's a massively multiplayer environment. It's like one of these we're going to change everything kind of things. And so they got $100 million in investment. This was just a few weeks ago they announced this.
Oh, wow.
And yesterday or a couple days ago, they already announced layoffs. So it's one of these things where some projects got a whole bunch of money, and then investors are like, oh my God, we can't actually back all of this up that we've committed to because the whole financial situation is getting rough for everyone. And so even companies like that who have gotten large amounts of money are all of a sudden like, oh, investors can't actually support all that. We got to cut features. We got to cut people. And it's happening with those sort of investment funded companies, and it's happening with regular game studios, and it's happening for studios like ours who are looking for money and all of a sudden can't find it. And I think I saw an article a couple months ago that was like 2023 was the year of layoffs, 2024 is going to be the year of closures.
Mm.
So, which of course is scary for smaller game studios like ours. Um, and I would say to people who are thinking about starting a studio right now, be very cautious about that because there is not a lot of investment money. Publishers are being very careful about funding anything. You have to have like a functioning, solid prototype to show. It's not enough to just go in and be like, "Oh, we got this great pitch deck, we got this great team, and here's some quick kind of gameplay stuff in a gray box." Like that's not going to cut it with most publishers anymore. And there is already so many little studios out there, and so many little studios that have started in the wake of all these layoffs and cuts. You're going to have a really hard road to get started right now. Um, so I would be cautious about trying like being like, I got laid off, better start a studio. I don't know. It's the first time I've ever said that to any. I've ever actually been in a state of mind to say that. Like in the past, I've always been like, yeah, get out there, do your own thing. I don't know if this is a good time to do it.
Yeah, yeah. There's a comment in our chat here about physical games also having a big challenge, and I think we saw. For those who are not aware, I have a board game design company as well. I've had games published before in the board game tabletop space. We're talking to publishers and investors on a project we're working on right now on that, and it is it's challenging, and it seems like on the board game space, publishers are looking for a very specific kind of game. A lot of folks are looking for like what's going to be that next fun, not necessarily party game, but something like next Settlers of Catan or something. They don't want anything that's too meaty, something that's easily digestible, and it seems, at least on the physical space, the manufacturing has gotten better during COVID with all the logistics stuff. I mean, trying to get anything manufactured and shipped over from China was just not going to happen, right? It just wasn't going to happen. And then it looks like they've worked through the backlog on a lot of that stuff. So there are some opportunities there. But yeah, to your earlier point, we've talked about this on the show before, but one of the things that's been mentioned is that a few years before COVID and then into the sort of big first couple of years of COVID, there was cheap money. You could just get loans for 1 to 3%, and so it just incentivized people to, probably against their better judgment, to go and take out loans and debt leverage finance acquisitions and whatnot. And then they got into this issue where all of a sudden things were not providing the revenue that they thought they were, or, whatever's happening. We're seeing that last week. We talked about, I don't know if you've been following the Xbox Activision thing last week, where they had 1,900 layoffs, with 900 of those coming from Activision Blizzard. And now the FTC is back on them because they're like, hey, you said that as part of this acquisition, Activision Blizzard was supposed to function as an independent entity from Microsoft, and then you just got rid of 900 people, and so that's opening up a door of issues for them. And I'm sure that's all has to do with redundancy and stuff, but it's rough seas out there, unfortunately. But our goal here in these conversations is to help people, find ways to be successful. So, obviously we have things like GDEX, our expo, coming up in October here in beautiful Columbus, Ohio. So we try to provide a platform, but what you have a lot of friends in the industry. I don't know if you have any that you're aware of that have gotten laid off recently, or if there's anything you want to mention on that. But what are maybe some of your positive suggestions for ways to go? I mean, what have you been talking to your friends about?
Well, if you are if you're an indie, especially if you don't have, well, even if you do have a ton of experience, but if you're trying to get started in the industry and you want to make a game, the positive side is there are so many resources out there for you to be able to make a game. more than there have ever been before. And if you can come, Chris, you've heard me on this soapbox before, but if you can come to a publisher, even a small publisher, with a functioning game that looks pretty good and most importantly is fun to play, it almost doesn't matter what the environment is. You have a huge leg up on any competition. So if you're able to, whatever you do, whether you're working on games on the side or you're a student working on something or you have a job in games and you're doing something on the side, if you can take that extra time, especially now, to make the game, just keep your nose to the grindstone and make the game. Don't look for funding. Do it on the side. Do it with friends who are also passionate about whatever you're making. Do maybe a profit sharing thing if you don't have money, because lots of people don't have money. I know people who've been very successful with a profit sharing model with a small team. Get it to the point where it's good enough to show to somebody. You are going to be in a really good position to go to a publisher and say, hey, look, publisher, like, we're not just coming to you with a deck. We're not just coming to you with some people who've done things. We're coming to you with this thing that you can actually play, and it's good and it's fun. All you have to do is give us more money to make more of it. Essentially make a vertical slice. That is probably the best thing you can be doing with your time right now. I personally, if I was starting my company now, I wouldn't actually waste time starting a company and building a team and trying to like fund it. I would just get with some people and make something.
Mm-hmm.
And then once this awful environment passes, you might have something already and you could be like, hey, publisher, you want something cool? Here you go. Check it out. And that's what publishers love. They want to de-risk as much as possible. Like even in the best of times, publishers want to de-risk as much as possible, and especially now. Even if the environment is bad in a year, they're still going to be looking for stuff, and they're still going to be looking for the lowest possible risk things to publish. So give them something that is already good, and you will have a huge leg up. That's what I would advise people right now,
Yeah.
in terms of what to do.
Great advice. You heard it here first. No, I agree. You know, I've been doing this for like 12 years now, and I look back and it's like, you know, for example, you could spend, if you have the discipline and you're willing to carve out time in your week, you could do a full-time job, you know, your 40 hours a week, and then put, you know, 20 to 40 hours into a project on the side to get it to a point where you could potentially bring it to a publisher, maybe crowdfund it. We have a comment on chat about early access, so we can talk about that. You could always attempt to early access it if you've got something. But it's really, really hard when your primary sources of income are reliant on the project you're building, and the project you're building is not getting funding.
Yes.
And that's an extremely difficult place to be. And as someone who's had this business for over a decade, we've been up and down. We're like, sometimes we've had enough money and funding, and we're like, okay, we have a glide path here. You know, our runway is X amount of time. And then you just, you know, you just run out of money before you can get to the next milestone to be able to get, you know, whatever you need. And then you're back at scraping and clawing again, which of anybody who's been broke before, just in general, knows that it's really hard to do things in your life when you're constantly just having to survive and function. You know, we've been very fortunate that we've been able to cut down when needed and ramp up when needed, but it's a hard place to be. The other thing that I think you touched on, but this is more on like the negotiating side, is that the further your game is, hey Pumpkin, the further your game is along, the more leverage you have in the conversations with potential investors and publishers. So I'd be curious on when, as somebody who's gone through multiple stages, when do you think is a good time to approach someone about potential funding? Like where in your development? You mentioned a vertical slice, but
yeah, vertical slice is the best. If you can get it to a vertical slice, that's the best thing you could do. Vertical slice is basically all of your core systems are functioning. You have art. You have at a minimum a beautiful corner. which is like a part of the game where you can point to, say, it's a level or it's part of a level, depending upon what kind of a game you have, um, that looks like you intend it to look in the final product. Um, and you can basically say, this is the game. There's going to be more of it, but like it's a single level that's functioning the way we want it to be functioning in the final game. All the systems are implemented, or if they're not fully implemented, they're at least implemented at a high enough level that you can tell they're going to be fun. And you can actually see the fun, right? It's not like, oh, this is going to be fun when we add this and this and this. It's like, this game is fun on its own, and you can play it, and this gives you the experience that we want you to have. And maybe there are things that we can add to it that are going to make it even cooler, but that stuff is not required. It's like, this is the experience. Here it is. Now give us money to make more of this and market it. That's the absolute best situation. Anything less than that, like you could make a prototype that has some of the systems, or is illustrating part of, or maybe like the meat of it, and then there's some other things that aren't in yet. But you really have to prove the fun. You have to prove that the thing that you have made is actually fun to play. And if you don't have that, you can't get anywhere with a publisher or an investor.
Yeah, I agree. So along those lines, in our class, we talked about production this week, and just how long it takes to make a game. You're looking at 3 to 5 years, depending on what it is. But I feel like we're in this interesting, and that's usually that's kind of AAA development.
Yeah, my experience is more 2 to 3 years, because I've worked more in kind of like AA and AAA, and it's sort of it's like, hey, I got to get this done in 2 to 3 years, or we're gonna run out of money. So
yeah,
I mean,
it depends. I mean, you've got Rockstar over here, which is we're over a decade on GTA 6, right? So like,
yeah, different world.
Yeah, yeah. When you've got GTA Online dumping money in your bank account every day, you can afford to spend a decade on a project. But I guess what this conversation's been simmering up around. I noticed it kind of mid last year, then it kind of died down with all the layoffs and stuff. But just the reality that the budget of games, particularly in the maybe double to AAA space, is just becoming unsustainable. We're getting games that cost more to make, and then we're getting more games out every year. There are just so many titles that come out every year.
Every day.
Back in our day, when we were young, you'd grab a game, a Nintendo or Super Nintendo game or whatever, and you'd play that game like nonstop for like a month, maybe 2 months, maybe more, and like you'd really dig in on it. Now it's just like you're just inundated. I mean, people's Steam libraries are like 200-300 games deep.
Oh yeah.
They're never going to get to these things. So, but between like all of those factors, there seems to be a conversation that pops up, I'd say every 6 months, about it's almost like resetting expectations for gamers. It's like, how do we reset the idea of what a game is going to be, and then be able to move timelines down to that 2 to 3 year timeline. Try to get a game into a reasonable budget. For folks that don't know, I mean, most AAA games nowadays, I mean, you're going to be lucky if you get out under 50 million, not counting marketing. And then you've got big titles like, you're not, I think Last of Us was like $250-300 million part 2 to make. And the rumor is that GTA 6 is currently over $1 billion. Like, I mean, that's ludicrous, right? So how do we get some of these? And there's plenty of companies that are doing it, right? They manage to maintain their budget and produce great results. But I think gamers are more and more wanting specific things. The expectations are so high for games that come out, and I'm gonna tie this into some CRPG stuff in a second. But I'm curious about just your initial thoughts on that topic before we jump into that.
Yeah, I mean, AAA games are almost a completely different animal now than AA and indie or triple I and indie. I mean, it's almost a different entertainment medium. Like
Sure.
AAA games are doing something so different and appealing to. They're Hollywood blockbusters. Actually, they're more profitable and probably cost more than some or a lot of Hollywood blockbusters. Um, and it's just very difficult to compare that to an indie game that's made by four people. It's almost impossible to even make that comparison because they're just trying to do such different things. And I do think that audiences, like, I think the hardest space is that middle ground. I do think that audiences get it in the sense that, like, they know to expect something very different from The Last of Us versus from indie games that are working on very small budgets. And they're almost not competing. Like, I have gradually become more of an indie, like double A to indie kind of a player. I don't even play the triple A stuff anymore, really.
Mm.
Like, it's not that interesting to me. A lot of it is it's very mass market. It's very high budget. A lot of it is sort of very linear. And as a RPG branching narrative kind of guy, I'm not really interested in these sort of like, if I just wanted to play the action sequences and just, sort of see a story play out, I would watch a movie. Like, I'm not interested enough in just playing the action sequences. I want something that takes full advantage of what games can do as a medium, and that tends not to happen in that AAA space. It tends to happen more in the AA, triple I, and indie, that world. And so I think that the audience does get the difference between that indie stuff and the AAA stuff. The really hard part comes in that space in between, which unfortunately is where I've been functioning for a long time. Where, like, you're in double A, like, you don't look like a triple A game, but it looks good enough that people kind of expect lots and lots of time into the game and, really lots and lots of systems and, high art fidelity and all these other things. And it's just like, we can't compete with Baldur's Gate 3, right? Like, even though Baldur's Gate 3 is an isometric game, it was made over the course of 6 or 7 years with a massive team of hundreds of people, many millions of dollars. Like, a $10 million double A or triple I RPG just can't compete with that. It's just the volume of stuff they were able to put into that game can't be done for a smaller amount of money. And communicating that or figuring out where those middle ground games, how they should be marketed and how players should think about them is just a real challenge.
Yeah, I think that's kind of interesting. Couple weeks ago, we talked about. I had Scott Lewandowski on, and we talked about um, gaming over the past 40 years. It's always been about better graphics, pushing, because it's easy to sell the visuals, right? When you're just
Hmm.
creating a marketing thing, it's a lot harder to sell mechanics, right? Or games that are trying to do interesting things. So, without spoiling, you mentioned, we talked about The Last of Us. The Last of Us Part 2 is a single player sort of narrative driven game, no choices, but it does play with the conventions of video games in some interesting ways that
Mm.
I'm very curious when it comes out as the show, HBO show. There's just some things that aren't going to translate quite right. I'm sure they'll be fine narratively, but
Mm.
that game does some things where it's playing with the language of games in some interesting ways. But we talked a lot about, and my take has been, just as a sort of gaming nerd, I guess, as I would like to see this horsepower that's being put into computers used for something other than ray tracing, path tracing, all that excitement. Like, what can we do with NPC AI, for example, enemy AI? Like,
Hmm.
what can we do on the simulation front? Like, can we do some really cool stuff? Um, and Pumpkin, you're gonna knock my glass over. I feel it. I feel it in you. Um, and so yeah, and one of my favorite games, Outer Worlds, I think suffered from one of the things that you mentioned, where I really liked Outer Worlds, and I think that it's got a lot of. I view it as somebody who sees the potential in the infrastructure they build in Outer Worlds 1 that could be in Outer Worlds 2. But if you
Hmm.
look at Outer Worlds as just like its own thing, yeah, it's a game that's kind of trying to tread in the double AAA space, but doesn't quite hit it.
Yeah, boy, did they set themselves up for a tough battle there.
Yeah.
Like they look like they're trying to be a Skyrim, Fallout 4, kind of like
Yep.
that world, right? But they don't give you that, oh look, there's that mountain over there. I'm gonna go over there and climb that mountain. Like they
Yeah.
don't give you that. It's a zone-based game. So it's like a lot of players who want to play another Skyrim. Oh, cool. It's like a Fallout Skyrim type of thing, but it's this different type of world. And then they didn't get that. And
Yeah.
that was setting themselves up for some
And
bad
that didn't
stuff.
bother me necessarily because I've been through every open world game under the sun. And at this point, I'm like,
Yeah.
dude, you structure your world in whatever way makes the most sense. But I definitely get it. Another game that I think is interesting along that is Returnal. I don't know if you've played Returnal. That's a Housemarque game who is traditionally like their shtick is arcade kind of bullet hell shooter kind of things. And they created Returnal as a PS5 release game at a $70 price point.
Wow.
And it is a great game and it does some really cool stuff, but it is a third person, pretty brutal roguelike game where when you die, you restart and you lose all your stuff. And I think that it's a hard sell for a general audience. Like you see
Yeah.
that stuff in the indie world frequently. You know, some
Yeah.
of my favorite games like Rogue Legacy, you know, Hades is very well regarded. But you don't see that kind of game in the AAA space. So I'm glad Sony took the risk and, you know, published it. And now they own Housemarque. But and I think Returnal's a great game. But I could see somebody walking into a store paying $70 for this, thinking it's a space marine shooter game or something, and then being like, what? Every time I die, after an hour, I lose all my stuff. You're like, you're going to have some disappointed
Yeah.
customers, I would think.
I
Um,
wonder if there was like some like Dark Souls thought going on there where they're like, oh, we're gonna make this really challenging and difficult and people are gonna love the challenge of it. It sounds like it didn't really work that way. That I'm a little surprised. Obviously I didn't play Returnal, don't know much about it. I'm a little surprised they didn't at least try to do something like what Hades did, where okay, yeah, you die, but then you're learning more and there's interesting things happening when you die, and you're not just sort of losing everything, you're getting like more story, because that sort of feels like that pushed that genre forward. And now if you're gonna play in that realm effectively and smartly, you sort of have to respond to what Hades did in some way.
sure. So
It didn't doesn't sound like they did.
I would say that there is some strong narrative elements that I think are in Returnal that is pretty cool, and they do some stuff
Okay.
that I think is interesting. But I just think overall it is a. I'm glad they did it. I think Returnal's a great game. I really enjoyed it. I'm glad that there's still people like Sony, at least in the AAA space, is willing to try some weird stuff. And you've still got like folks like Hideo Kojima. You know, Death Stranding was a weird ass game, and I really liked it. And a lot of people love it. I'm curious what the second one's going to be like. And I consider Hideo Kojima to be sort of an auteur of our industry, where he understands the medium and he's always trying interesting, different things. You know, I mean, just thinking back to like Metal Gear, where you had to change the controller ports to be able to beat one of the bosses, you know, and it would read your memory card, and it did neat stuff that's just like, how had nobody thought of this before, right? You know,
Mm-hmm.
so he's thinking about the medium as it evolves, which I think is really cool. So I'm gonna tie in. Actually, you mentioned Baldur's Gate 3. I'm gonna tie that in because last week Xbox had their business summit. I don't know if you followed that, and they were trying to, I think, answer some questions and then assuage a few other things. My big takeaway from it is that Xbox is going to start releasing games on PlayStation with more frequency, whether that's a timed exclusive or day and date. They haven't really, given a ton of details, but it seems like that could be one answer to the question of maybe you don't reset gamers' expectations necessarily, but you broaden out your market. So maybe exclusivity, I don't want to say will become a thing of the past, but we're already sort of seeing that, like most PlayStation games now are working their way to at least PC as a thing. I would be surprised if Bungie's new game Marathon, if that's going to be a PlayStation exclusive. I would be surprised for that. So broadening out your market, trying to find more people to purchase your products. Obviously, games have moved from the $60 price point to the 70, which I don't think is a big deal. I know people are causing an uproar, but I think games have been undervalued for quite some time. But I'm going to jump into sort of Baldur's Gate 3 because I think that's a special case where they were in early access for like 3 years or something.
Yes.
And so and to their credit, I think they did it very smart. They didn't use early access as like purely a funding mechanism, which they did. It helped fund their development, but they also used it as a continual like playtest, focus testing system. And so I think that allowed them to make some very significant changes to it. So I'm curious, just both maybe from your perspective and then also maybe from a business standpoint, how are you feeling about early access as an avenue for this these days?
So it's hard for me to judge on the financial side because I have never been on the business side of a company that released a game early access. So I don't know exactly what like the numbers look like and how much it helps fund development and all that. I'm only seeing it really from basically the same perspective anyone else is. So that part of it, oddly enough, I don't have a lot to say about. I do think the early access as being able to watch what players do in your game, respond to it, and give players more of the things that they find interesting. Like I think that was the big benefit of Baldur's Gate 3. Like if you play Act 1, to my shame, I haven't gotten past Act 1 yet because I've just been playing over and over it. But if you play Act 1 of Baldur's Gate 3, there's just so many ways of like of approaching quests and doing things, and like you can turn yourself into a cat, and there's like ways of getting through the game that you wouldn't have even known if you didn't turn yourself into a cat. It's just amazing how much they got in, and it really feels, I'm not saying anything new here, but it really feels like pen and paper in the sense that they just got as many different ways to approach that content as they possibly could into the game. And I don't think they could have done that if they hadn't had a huge number of play testers and people. I mean, I suppose they could have hired an army of testers and maybe done it that way. But I don't think they could have done it otherwise, because like having lots and lots of players go through your stuff and say, I really wish I could have done this.
Yeah.
And being like, that's a really cool idea. And then being able to implement that. I've never been able to do that before in a game.
Sure. I also
when I was
think
developing a game.
I think there also is a difference. This is slightly semantics, but yeah, internal playtesting I think is just going to give you a different. It's sort of a different goal set when you talk about internal QA a lot of times than people who are taking the time to play your game. They're coming at it from like the love of it, whereas a lot of internal testing, a lot of QA is often based on bug reporting, game breaks. And it depends on how the company is structured, sort of how much leeway the QA team has in providing like design feedback, as opposed to just fundamental functioning. Whereas your early access player base they're not coming at it from like, this is my job to find bugs. They're coming at it from like, I want to make this game fun, or this is what I think would be cool kind of thing. And there is a story that through their early access experience, the Baldur's Gate team was able to they completely revamp their UI UX system based on the feedback. So it's like they did, how many games can you think of that do a complete UI rebuild 2, 3, 4 years into development, right? It just generally doesn't happen. They may tweak things here or there, but so I think that was something that provided them a lot of value. Plus, being able to have that funding, they were able to get continual funding throughout the development cycle. I mean, Star Citizen is another game that is doing this. Like, I don't know what that game even is, and like, it's in beta. I don't think it'll ever be a real game, but like, it's a real game, and people, it crossed, it crossed a big threshold last year, and if it works, if you can find an audience that's going to keep providing you the funds. I still play Path of Exile, and that game's totally free. And you buy season passes or whatever if you want to support it. And they manage to keep making it happen, but getting in that loop is incredibly hard. Like getting into that space to start with. So lastly, we've got maybe about 10 minutes left. I do want to talk about CRPGs. Because those are that's the love in your heart, and that's what you've chosen
that's what we do.
To focus on. You're building a company around it. You and I have worked together on some projects, in various degrees. Some that have CRPG elements, others not so much. But I'm kind of just curious where your take on that genre is. It's not, you don't hear the term CRPG very much until a big thing like. I mean, when Cyberpunk came out, that kind of brought it up, even though that's not really a CRPG. And then obviously Baldur's Gate 3. But other than that, you don't really hear that term thrown around a lot. So I'm kind of curious about your thoughts on when we grew up, they were everywhere. But it's a different world now.
Yeah, I mean, there's still a lot. There's a lot of things coming out on smaller budgets. That you don't hear about a lot. So, you mentioned that discoverability problem with Steam and people having tons and tons of games coming out every day. There are things always kind of in development and coming out. There are places you can go to look for that stuff, various RPG forums and other discussions and Discord groups and things. I think there's actually a lot more development in that space happening. It's just that it is perceived as more of a niche market. So if you go looking for them, they are there. But they're, except for Baldur's Gate 3 and a few other things, they're usually not the ones that get the huge marketing pushes. But that's also fine because there is always a healthy and interested market for those games. It's just that it is a niche. So if you are an investor or a publisher, making a CRPG is not going to get you 10 times your money. But that's fine. Like you can still make a perfectly decent profit making those games, as long as you keep the budgets under control. And there's lots of really interesting things that are happening. So, best example or recent example, Disco Elysium came out. It was a CRPG that didn't have a traditional combat system. In fact, it didn't have a combat system at all. Mm-hmm. And now there are a number of CRPGs that are coming out that don't have combat systems, and they're trying to do different things. Most of them right now are a little too close to Disco Elysium. Like they're just kind of being like, we're going to make Disco Elysium with like exactly the same formula they did, except in this world. And with writing that's not as good. And so that's not really working quite as well. But like the idea of, hey, you could make a CRPG around fun systems that are not necessarily combat. Or you could have combat, but maybe you don't have some of the other traditional systems and you have something else in its place. So there's no crafting, but there's something else. That is fascinating to me because CRPGs can represent so many different kinds of experiences. It doesn't just have to be the adventurer running around murdering everything. Like it can be lots of different things, and you can apply CRPG techniques to a lot of different player fantasies. And as long as the systems that underlie them are fun, all of a sudden there's just all kinds of other different things that you can do with a CRPG. And I think that is one thing you're going to see. Like we're always going to keep seeing the combat-based CRPGs because they're really fun. But yeah. I think we're also seeing more experimentation with what else can CRPGs do? And that stuff's not going to be at the $100 million budget, $50 million budget level because no publisher is going to take a chance on that. Sure. That stuff is going to be happening at the indie level.
What do you think is a good what do you think is a good budget range for, we'll say, I mean, decent sized studios, kind of like in our world, maybe, where you're not a 2 to 3 person indie team, but you're also not like a 50+ person group. Maybe what would be a decent budget that you could see creating sustainable products in that space?
Right now, 8 to 12 million.
Okay.
You can make a decent CRPG, decent looking, and with interesting systems, and it's not going to be like a Baldur's Gate 3 behemoth, but it's going to be a decent game for in the United States, I should add, 8 to 12 million.
Yeah. Well, I would also, just to jump in, a lot of people don't want a Baldur's Gate 3 behemoth. So my friend, who doesn't play video games very much at all, he started playing Baldur's Gate 3 because he was just like bored with work, and he's just like, I just want to start doing something new. And he was very similar to you, where like he never got through Act 1, and he noticed he was like stuck in some tree with this like root system or whatever, and he was just like, I just found that I was wasting so much time running around in this area that I just sort of stopped. He's like, you know what? Forget this game. This game's cool. It's doing amazing stuff, but like, I don't want to spend 200-300 hours doing something, particularly when a lot of it's backtracking or whatever. So I could think of, creating tight experiences. Donkey did a review on Super Mario RPG, and one of the things he mentioned, he's like, this is a game that's got 24 hours worth of content shoved into 12 hours. And I was just like, yeah, like you don't need to balloon everything out, right? Which I think is maybe an issue that the RPG/CRPG genre has struggled from traditionally, is this desire to make things bigger.
So this is a really interesting question, and it is an argument that happens even behind the scenes. And I recently had this discussion with some people.
Okay.
So there are people in the CRPG development and investment community who believe that the RPG audience, the core RPG audience, will not buy a game that doesn't feel big and expansive. And I'm talking about like the hardcore passionate, not like the people who are just kind of buying an RPG and I'll play it for a few hours. But
Maybe.
There's like that there are people who want that huge experience. There are other people who argue that there are more people who want what you just described, who want like a shorter, more focused, more compact game. I don't know the answer to that. Like, I think the answer is there are people on both sides, but I don't know like where the sweet spot is. I think you're right that Baldur's Gate 3 is too much. I think there are people who love it, but it's very hard to get through it in a world where there are so many games coming out all the time. Especially for a game developer who wants to play a lot of different things, it's almost impossible to get through a 200-hour game. But I actually think that there is more room for shorter, smaller experiences like what your friend is describing, than always having to make a game that's massive. And I've had that argument with people, and it remains unsettled. But yes, like I think a lot of people nowadays who have less time want to sit down with a more focused game. And if you can make an RPG that's 15, 20 hours, there's nothing wrong with that.
Totally. I definitely, there's a space for everyone, right? It's just, how can you make it to the audience and make sure you're within that budget? And there's some games that so I'm looking at things too from just my personal perspective, being older and busy. And then also, folks in our generation, we've gone through I always started GTA 3, which obviously is not the first open world game, but is the open world game that kind of blew up. Everything after GTA 3 had to be like this giant open world thing. And it was just like, This map's twice the size of GTA 3. And, Vice City was like twice the size of GTA 3. And then San Andreas was like 4 times the size of Vice City.
Yes.
And then eventually people started noticing. And like Skyrim, I think, is a great example. People love Skyrim. I was like, that game has so much fluff in it that like it's crazy. There's just so much bullshit to do in there. I mean, sitting around your blacksmith shop making dagger after dagger to get your thing, like, and there's just plenty of places that have nothing going on in it. I think you can make and of course, Starfield had this issue too when it came out. It's just like you've got a
Mhm.
bazillion planets, but there's nothing on them. It's like cool.
Yep.
Uh, no Man's Sky was sort of in the same boat with that. You've got 6 quintillion planets, and it makes for a cool research paper, but I don't know if it makes for like the best game.
Yep.
But that being said, I do understand that when you're really in it, Fallout 1 and 2, the originals, I was in those games and I loved every like sort of square inch of it. But I found that in Fallout 3 and Fallout 4, I just found myself getting bored a lot when I was just
Yes.
walking around and there was nothing exciting going on. So to your point, I think there is some realm in there. And then it also depends, like you mentioned at the beginning of our talk, that you look at games, or at least these style of games, you're looking for player choice and autonomy and being able to make decisions. Whereas maybe another game is attempting to convey a narrative to you in a more specific way
Hmm.
that doesn't require choices, right? And maybe the choices would hurt a lot of people. This is sort of an older argument, but they talk about BioShock 1, where Ken Levine's team was forced to make
Oh yeah, yeah.
multiple endings because of, I don't know if it was Take Two or whoever their higher ups were, their overlords were like, hey, we need multiple endings. So they ended up creating it. And you could argue they did a decent job at making that happen. But ultimately, was it necessary? I don't think so, right?
Yeah, I mean, I did like that actually in BioShock. It was actually choosing by doing as opposed to
Yes.
choosing by narrative, choosing by doing is a really interesting way to approach it. This is my own personal feeling. Like games can do something that no other medium can do, which is essentially tell a collaborative story with the player.
Yeah.
And when a game doesn't do that, I personally feel like it's a lost opportunity and it's less interesting to me. I know there are lots of people, millions and millions of people who play games that don't have choices in them. I mean, most JRPGs don't have choices in them really. Um, and they're fine with that, and that's fine. But like for me as a player and as a maker of games, like if you're not using that one unique thing that games can do, I just feel like it's like, wow, why don't you just go make a movie? Like if you want to tell the
Sure.
story, go make a movie. It's like I'm not really interested in playing your action sequences.
Yeah.
Um,
I, I
but that's
I'll, I'm
that's
gonna
me.
push. I'm gonna push back just a little bit. I smell what you're spraying, but I also feel like there are things that the action sequences can do and the interactivity within games that can help like amplify the emotional resonance that you might be getting from the narrative in a way that film can't do. And I remember specifically there's some moments in like the first Last of Us game where after the sequence was done, I kind of looked back and I was like, oh wow, like because of the way this action set piece was presented to me and then interweaved with the cutscenes, like it got me. Like it got me into it in a way that film rarely does.
Hmm.
But I do agree with you. And in our last minute here, just as a sort of, which is funny because you're a narrative guy, right? So this is the angle that I think you come from a lot. But we had a conversation in my class yesterday a little bit about story. And I wanted them, because we use terms like, you think of the 3 act structure, and we use terms like rising action and climax. And a lot of those are, when you think of them, are sort of like, it's sort of like what in photography. My bachelor's is in photography. We would talk a lot. A lot of the terms in photography are like sort of violence based. Like I'm going to go shoot something, right? I'm going to go shoot
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah.
photo. I'm going to capture this scene, right? But I was encouraging my class to think about, well, how can you create conflict without violence? How can you create a climax that doesn't
Yes.
require fighting, right? And I'm kind of curious in just our last thought here, because you were mentioning that games are capable of doing a lot of these things. Some closing thoughts maybe on that sort of idea before we wrap up.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. And that's sort of something that I've always tried to do in games. And it can be done by creating systems that are not violence based, right? You could have systems in a game that aren't just about killing people; they're about whatever. You have systems in games like Yakuza that are about running a
Jesus.
right, running a like a some kind of a cafe or something.
Yeah. Well,
And it can,
Shinmu was around a lot of that too. It was trying to create these little
yeah,
interactions that weren't fighting based.
yeah, and it could be fun, and you could create a climax. Like you could have taken any of those non-violent systems in a game like Yakuza, and turn that into a game, and you don't even need violence in it. You could still have that rise to a climax, and you could have a story playing out against with those systems against that backdrop, and you could tell a whole story, just a completely fulfilling story with those kinds of systems. And so there's no reason that you have to have it. You have to have like a story be about killing stuff. A story could be about anything as long as you have fun systems underlying it. So that's one way to do it. The other way to do it is like or another way to do it is like what the old Fallout games and Planescape Torment did, where yes, there is a violent way to solve this, but if you do take certain paths through the game, you could also solve this. You could also have a climactic conversation or interaction at the end. And instead of having to murder the big bad guy at the end, you convince him to kill himself, like with the Master in Fallout. Or I think in Planescape Torment, you sort of join with the main antagonist and become something else, and that's the way you end the game. You don't have to fight that individual. So there are ways to do it, and a lot of times they're more interesting and exciting and satisfying because they go against player expectation of a giant boss fight at the end or some sort of violent confrontation.
I think that's great. I feel like one of the things as an older gamer that is just missing a lot is those options. Even a game, I love Cyberpunk, and I haven't played through the DLC fully yet, but it seems like they added some of it. But they're just, for a game that was so robust as an RPG, it just seemed like there weren't ways to like talk yourself out of a situation. It always seemed to just result into violence of some kind. And it kind of broke my heart. I don't know if you saw, but the Eidos Montreal team that was making the next Deus Ex game got laid off the other week. And that made me sad because was it Human Revolution? Was it the second one? Or Mankind? I can't remember. Mankind Divided.
Mankind Divided was the second one.
Yeah. So Mankind Divided really felt, I know a lot of people was like, it felt like it was building up to something and then just kind of ended. But the things that the jump from Human Revolution to Mankind Divided in terms of what level design, player NPC interactions, all this stuff was just like amazing. They had that like visual overlay where you could try to like decipher if people were lying to you and if they were being, if you would ask them questions so you could kind of navigate conversations based on these little pings you were receiving. Like that was really neat. And you don't see a lot of those systems, at least and I predominantly play in the console world. You don't see a lot of those things in the console space. And I would like to see more of that stuff come back. I would like to see just more interesting interactions using gaming as a framework. And I think that could be really, really exciting. So, all right.
It doesn't happen as much because it is risky.
Sure.
But in the indie space, that is a great place where these things can be tried out. So make games. That's, people who are listening who want to get into the game industry or who are already into it, make games with interesting systems in the indie space, and maybe that will show that these things can be fun and they'll get picked up.
All right. Well, on that note, thank you, George, for being here. I really appreciate it. It was a great conversation. I've been trying to keep up with the chat and bring stuff in, but man, you guys are on fire today. So thanks for everybody that's in the Twitch chat. So this has been episode 11 of the Sandbox Weekly podcast. Of course, we do this every week at 10 a.m. Eastern time on Twitch, the GDEX Twitch. So twitch.tv/the GDEX. We also post these on the GDEX's YouTube, so you can catch them later or go back in time if you've missed any and want to check them out. A reminder to keep an eye on thegdex.com because we are announcing a bunch of stuff for our expo coming up. An expo in which George has been a speaker at many, many times in the past. I'm always appreciative of that. Oh, baby. Baby's going to say bye because I think she wants to get down. And of course, you can go to the Sandbox.Space and sign up for our weekly email to get all the articles that we talked about today, as well as a blog post by me every week. So thank you, everybody, for watching. We will see you next week at the Sandbox.Space.